History often turns on moments invisible to the men living through them. Long before a single soldier stepped onto the shores of Normandy, long before the first landing craft dropped its ramp, an unseen war was already underway, a battle of steel, industry, and the raw willpower of nations. In the winter of 1944, as storms carved across the English coast, a quiet realization began to bloom inside the British High Command. The Americans were not merely preparing for an invasion. They were rewriting the very rules of naval warfare. And the first man to truly see it was Admiral Sir Charles Little. Plymouth Harbor, January 1944. The wind knifes through the channel, the kind of bitter cold that seeps into the plates of a warship and refuses to leave. Admiral Sir Charles Little, Commander-in-Chief at Portsmouth, stands rigid beside the frosted window of his office. For more than 30 years he has worn the Royal Navy's uniform. He watched the Grand Fleet gather at Scapa Flow in the Great War. He helped choreograph the frantic, smoke-choked rescue at Dunkirk. He knows the posture of a navy. He knows the shape of a fleet. And more than perhaps any officer still serving, he understands the hard ceiling of naval logistics. Now, gazing across the gray, restless water, he waits, not for a British convoy, but for something altogether different. Out of the mist emerge 18 American hulls, steel silhouettes plowing low through the swell. Their plimsoll lines are swallowed by the sea. Cargo is not merely stored below, it towers above the decks in crates, trucks, engines, entire structures wrapped under canvas and chained down like beasts. These are Liberty ships, the workhorses of the United States. In the past 2 weeks alone, Little has counted 43 American convoys entering his command. 43. Meanwhile, the Royal Navy, stretched thin chasing U-boats and escorting Arctic convoys, can scarcely maintain its patrols. Yet across the Atlantic, a seemingly endless procession of steel keeps coming. Little turns away from the window toward his logistics officer, an exhausted man half buried beneath manifests and berthing charts. Little asks him a question as simple as it is devastating: how many now? How many American ships are actually in our port? The officer lowers his eyes to a column of shifting figures. He doesn't hesitate. 217, sir, as of 0600. He hesitates only long enough to add the punchline: that does not include the landing craft still being built upriver, nor the 84 vessels due in Tuesday's convoy. 217 ships in one British harbor, and it is only January, months before the invasion is scheduled to begin. As the weight of that number settles in, Admiral Little realizes something he never expected to admit: the naval principles he spent a lifetime mastering no longer apply. The Americans are not contributing forces. They are erasing scarcity itself. Yet numbers in a ledger are only ink. The physical displacement of thousands of hulls is another matter. As winter gives way to early spring, the situation becomes dire. You can assign quotas in a London conference room. You can agree to accept 3,000 American vessels for Operation Neptune. But you cannot summon new coastline from thin air. Southern England has only so many deep-water harbors, only so many anchorages, piers, jetties, and by March the geography is losing its battle against the invasion's physics. Vice Admiral Bertram Ramsay, the Allied Naval Commander-in-Chief, works from Southwick House. Ramsay is a master of order, a man who calculates in tonnage and tide. One morning he receives a report from Falmouth that reads like a joke: the anchorage is so full of American ships that their swing radii overlap. If the wind shifts, the vessels will knock together like billiard balls. The British instinct is obvious: pause the convoys, stagger arrivals, wait for space to open. That is the logic of a nation 5 years deep into rationing and scarcity. But the Americans are not operating on that logic. Ramsay travels to the coast to see the disaster he's expecting. He lifts his binoculars to the Solent, bracing himself for chaos. Instead, he sees something unimaginable: the ocean transformed. Columns of LST stretched 3 miles into open water. They are not in the harbor, they are the harbor. Ships packed so tightly bow to stern that a man could walk from shore to the mouth of the bay without ever stepping into seawater. The Americans have solved the shortage of docks by simply discarding the idea of docks entirely. They have built a floating continent of steel on the channel. This impossible sight forces the Admiralty to confront one terrifying question: where are all these ships coming from? Every British officer knows the condition of the King's shipyards, from the Clyde to Belfast. Britain is fighting merely to keep its surviving warships patched together. Destroyers limp home with torpedo wounds. Cruisers return half-broken from patrol. Building an entire amphibious fleet from scratch is inconceivable. Yet every sunrise brings more American silhouettes. A logistics officer in the Admiralty finally digs into the American production numbers. He assumes the tables are wrong, perhaps the US has counted projected keels or inflated its totals with harbor launches. But when he cross-checks the yard data from Kaiser, Higgins, Norfolk, and San Diego, the truth emerges with brutal clarity. A Liberty ship that required 244 days to build in 1941 now takes a fraction of that time. The officer recalculates with his slide rule, convinced he has lost a decimal. But the figures are correct. The Americans are finishing 3 Liberty ships every single day. By the time he finishes breakfast, a new vessel slides into the Pacific. By nightfall 2 more join it. Some yards are launching a completed cargo ship every 4 days from a single slip. He writes a quiet note in the margin, a sentence that echoes through the Admiralty with equal parts awe and dread. They are not building ships. They are manufacturing them. Where Britain raises ships like cathedrals, slow, intricate, reverent, the Americans forge them like automobiles, applying the ruthless efficiency of the assembly line to naval warfare. And the outcome is unmistakable. A fleet growing faster than enemy torpedoes can sink it, faster than Britain can count it, faster even than the coastlines of England can physically contain it. But raw tonnage alone cannot storm a fortified beach. 1,000 cargo hulls mean nothing without the means to deliver war to shore. The Americans are preparing to solve that problem next. The conquest of Europe required a tool the Allies barely possessed when the war began, a vessel capable of dragging an armored army directly onto enemy shores. Admiral Ramsay understood what failure looked like. Gallipoli scarred his memory. Dieppe haunted every briefing. In 1942, the Allies learned a brutal lesson there. Trying to seize a port to unload tanks was suicide. The beaches ran red because the plan demanded the impossible. The conclusion was undeniable. You cannot take a defended harbor, you must deliver your armor straight onto open sand. And to do that, you need the LST, the landing ship tank. It is not a graceful creation. The flat bottom makes it lurch and sway like a drunk in the Atlantic swells. Its great steel bow doors gape open like the maw of some mechanical beast. It is slow, stubborn, and miserable to steer. But the British need them desperately, hundreds upon hundreds. Yet in early 1943, Churchill receives grim news. Britain simply cannot build them. LSTs demand specialized steel, massive engines, and sophisticated ballast systems allowing them to beach themselves, then drag free again. By May 1944, Ramsay stands aboard his headquarters ship, HMS Largs, watching column after column of American vessels assembling. He begins counting LSTs, 22 in the first column, 41 in the next. His flag lieutenant hands him the manifest. Ramsay stares at the figures. The Americans haven't brought a detachment, they've delivered nearly the entire world's supply. More than 200 American LSTs crowd the anchorage. But the steel hulls are only half the story. Inside each LST sits a fistful of mechanized power, 20 Sherman tanks or 33 fully fueled heavy trucks, ammunition stacked, engines primed, crews asleep beside their machines. Ramsay realizes he isn't looking at transports. He is looking at an army floating on the sea. The Americans haven't just solved a shortage, they have rewritten the problem itself. Each LST is a disposable bridge linking Detroit's factories to France's beaches. Yet the invasion will be won in the shallows, the stretch of water that turns soldiers into targets. And to cross it, you need swarms of small craft. Thousands. Admiral Sir Philip Vian, commanding the Eastern Task Force, is charged with putting British and Canadian troops ashore at Gold, Juno, and Sword. A fighting sailor of the old tradition, Vian visits the American sector to coordinate landing craft transfers. He expects rows of British LCAs, wooden lightly armored boats built by peacetime yacht yards. Reliable but delicate. Instead, at the depot near Weymouth, he sees something different. Squat rectangular silhouettes hanging from American transports. These are LCVPs, the Higgins boats. Flat-bottomed, plywood boxes that look more like floating coffins than military craft. Vian frowns and asks the American liaison about their durability. These things are plywood, he says. German machine guns will cut them to pieces. The American officer only grins. He doesn't defend their armor. Instead, he gestures toward the supply ships waiting offshore. Admiral, we didn't build them to last. We built them to be replaced. For every Higgins boat slung from the davits, 2 more sit below deck and 10 more wait in depots ashore. The Americans have brought them by the thousands. In that moment Vian sees the truth. The British try to build boats that survive the landing. The Americans build so many that survival is irrelevant. It is industrial warfare distilled to its harshest logic. If a Higgins boat is destroyed, you shove it aside and lower another. They are treating craft the way armies treat ammunition meant to be spent. As May bleeds into June, the conversation shifts from hulls to guns. The Atlantic Wall is not a metaphor, it is concrete, steel and artillery built to break an invasion. Heavy naval fire will be essential. Vian knows the Royal Navy's aging battleships, Warspite and Ramillies, valiant veterans each, but worn thin by years of Mediterranean and Atlantic combat. Their barrels are tired, their engines groan. They are all Britain can spare. Vian assumes the Americans will contribute destroyers, perhaps a cruiser or 2. After all, their main battleships are still slugging it out with the Imperial Japanese Navy across the Pacific. Then he boards a launch to inspect the fire support group for the Western Task Force. Out of the mist looms a vast silhouette. A battleship. But not British. It is the USS Nevada. Every naval officer knows her name. At Pearl Harbor she alone got underway under fire, bombed, torpedoed, run aground and left for dead. She should have been a permanent monument to disaster. And yet here she is, her guns elevated toward France. The Americans dragged her from the mud of Hawaii, rebuilt her, modernized her, sailed her through the Panama Canal, and brought her across the Atlantic. And she's not alone. USS Texas is there. USS Arkansas is there. Incredibly, the Americans have stripped capital ships from every corner of the globe and concentrated them here. Vian does a silent calculation. The Americans have brought more heavy guns to support 2 beaches than Britain has available for 3. The ruined ghosts of Pearl Harbor have crossed the world to strike back at Hitler. Then the loading begins. Numbers become faces. War becomes flesh. A British sergeant, an old Africa hand, marches his platoon down the quay at Southampton. The men grumble under 60 pounds of gear, nerves tight, memories raw with shortages and broken promises. They've been told the fleet is massive, but soldiers believe what they can see. He expects to board some tired old ferry or repurposed merchantman. That is the British habit, patch and improvise. Instead, their path takes them along the American sector. The sergeant stops dead. The quay stretches into the horizon, ship after ship after ship, not hundreds but what looks like thousands. And on every rail stand Americans tossing cigarettes, cracking jokes, tossing gum down to the marching British troops. The sergeant mutters to his corporal, "Bloody hell. The Yanks really did bring everyone." The corporal, a veteran of Italy, nods without surprise. "Aye, Sarge," he says quietly. "They always do. They don't know how to do it small." June 4th. The weather breaks. A brutal gale roars through the channel, heaving 5-foot waves even inside sheltered harbors and twice that in the open sea. Eisenhower, after agonizing through the forecasts, announces a 24-hour postponement. To civilians, a day's delay sounds trivial. To a naval commander, it is a catastrophe of logistics. 156,000 men are sealed inside steel hulls. They are seasick, restless, using up water, rations and morale. Every hour they remain aboard, they consume the supplies intended for the landing itself. British port authorities plunge into crisis mode. They must somehow resupply an invasion fleet already packed to the rails. Freshwater tankers must battle a storm to reach thousands of ships. Food must be found fast. In ration-starved Britain, rounding up tons of bread and meat overnight is nearly impossible. A British liaison officer hurries to the American logistics headquarters at Portland, expecting pandemonium, expecting desperate demands for emergency fuel or rations. Instead, he finds the American logistics chief calmly drinking coffee. With a nod toward the supply ships anchored behind the assault force, the American explains, "We didn't just pack for the invasion. We packed for the delay." They have millions of extra rations, fuel tankers sitting full for weeks of future use, entire floating warehouses of redundancy. The British officer scribbles in his diary later, "They think in abundance. We think in survival. We calculate the minimum." They calculate the minimum and add another ship just in case. June 5th. Eisenhower gives the order. "Okay. Let's go." The movement of 7,000 vessels is not a command, it is a miracle of coordination. Minesweepers sail first, slicing safe lanes through the sea. Behind them come the bombardment ships, then the LSTs, then the troop transports, each craft moving at its own speed, all in darkness, all under radio silence. At Southwick House, Admiral Ramsay stands at the center of the greatest maritime choreography in human history. He steps onto the balcony as the sun sinks. Engines rumble to life, a deep, shaking vibration that rattles panes and frames across the southern coast. The sound is not the noise of ships. It is the heartbeat of an empire on the move. From Plymouth, Dartmouth, Torquay, the American task force begins its departure. A British destroyer captain escorting the American flank watches his radar dissolve into a single glowing mass of contacts, so many ships that the screen becomes a solid smear. He climbs to the visual deck. Looking west, he cannot see water, only steel. A continuous bridge of ships stretches to the horizon. He counts 100 LSTs before giving up. More trail behind. More lie to port and starboard. His navigator, 16 years in the Royal Navy, whispers, "I've never seen anything like it." The captain answers, "No one has. And no one ever will again. It's a moving continent." June 6th, 0550 hours. The Armada lies off Normandy. Inside the German bunkers overlooking Omaha Beach, sentries peer into mist that has been empty for 4 long years. Rommel swore the blow would fall at Calais. German officers believed the Americans lacked the stomach for a real fight. The Atlantic Wall, they were told, was unbreakable. The mist lifts aboard the USS Texas. The gunnery officer waits, crosshairs fixed on a concrete casemate 3 miles inland. The Air Force was meant to pulverize these defenses, but cloud cover spared many of them. Now the naval guns must finish the job. Admiral Vian, watching from the east, expects a standard barrage, a measured softening of the defenses. What follows is not a bombardment. It is an annihilation. The USS Nevada, Texas, and Arkansas fire together. The sound is not individual blasts, it is a ragged, continuous tearing of the sky. The shockwave rolls across the channel, felt up to 40 miles away. Nevada hurls 1,400-pound shells, car-sized slabs of steel, onto French soil with sniper-like precision. Vian watches entire sections of hillside vanish. Earth erupts hundreds of feet into the air. The coastline is being reshaped in real time. This is the American way of war laid bare. Not elegance, not subtle maneuver, but the concentrated force of industrial power applied until the enemy dissolves. The Germans are not merely suppressed. They are being physically unmade by the steel born in the mills of Pittsburgh and Bethlehem, delivered at 2,000 feet per second. 0630 hours. Chower. The ramps fall at Omaha. The killing begins. The plan is flawless on paper. The fleet is massive, but the German defense is waiting. The first wave is shredded. The second pinned. On the command ships, panic ripples. Reports speak of catastrophic losses, drowning tanks, battalions trapped in surf. General Omar Bradley weighs the unthinkable, evacuating Omaha and shifting the effort to Utah. On a map it looks like disaster. But on the water the truth is different. A German officer manning an MG-42 watches the beach littered with American dead. He thinks the invasion has failed. As he swaps barrels, he glances toward the horizon through the smoke. His blood runs cold. There are more of them. Many more. Beyond the bodies in the surf are hundreds of circling Higgins boats. Behind them, LST after LST. Beyond them, rows of transports lowering fresh craft into the waves. The officer realizes the awful truth. It does not matter how many Americans they kill. It does not matter how many tanks they drown. The supply of men and machines is endless. At Dieppe, the British ran out of boats. At Omaha, the Americans simply keep feeding the beach until the beach breaks. They force a foothold not through finesse, but through the unstoppable momentum of a nation that refuses to run empty. D-Day is won. The beachhead holds. Most histories end here with triumph, with Paris liberated. But for the British High Command, the real revelation unfolds afterward. They expect the flow to slow. Ports in England now lie empty. The Armada is in France. Surely the tempo will ease. It does not. By late June, the Americans are building an artificial harbor on the water itself. They tow giant concrete caissons, mulberries across the channel. They scuttle old ships to form breakwaters. They lay floating roads that rise and fall with the tide. By June's end, they have delivered 850,000 men, not 150,000. They have landed 148,000 vehicles. They have put 570,000 tons of supplies ashore. The invasion did not happen in a single day. It became a river, an unbroken, unstoppable flow of American steel and resolve.